Imagine standing in a room where every glance feels like a judgment, every whisper slices deeper than a knife, and you, the outsider, are meant to break. But what if, instead of breaking, you rise? Tonight, we share the powerful story of Emma Clark, a simple woman humiliated at the grandest party of the year, only to shatter every expectation with a strength no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because what starts as a night of cruelty becomes a stunning victory that will leave you believing in your own unstoppable worth. Before we dive into the story, we pray that all of us are protected from harm, from cruelty, and from being judged unfairly. May this story inspire you, strengthen you, and remind you that true worth cannot be measured by appearances. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss more inspiring stories that remind us. Greatness often wears the simplest disguise. The Rosemont Hotel shimmered like a golden palace that evening, each chandelier dripping light onto walls wrapped in deep crimson velvet. Every polished marble floor tile reflected $1,000 shoe. Every soft note of violin music floated among gowns that cost more than most people's cars. The city's elite, a swirling parade of ambition and entitlement, gathered here not just to celebrate, but to be seen. Emma Clark stood near the far wall, her back brushing against a towering bouquet of white orchids. Her dress, a simple blue satin she had bought off the rack, barely whispered against the luxury-drenched air. No jewelry glittered at her throat. No manicured assistant flitted around her like a shadow. She smoothed her skirt unconsciously, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes pretending not to see her. Just a few more minutes, she thought, her heart tapping an uncertain rhythm. Ryan had texted her an hour ago. His flight was delayed. He was rushing. Almost there. Across the room, Catherine Whitmore held court at the grand table, her pearl-draped hand resting lightly on a senator's forearm as she laughed at some rehearsed compliment. She barely glanced toward Emma, even though the entire gala was supposed to celebrate Emma and Ryan's engagement. Instead, as the room began to buzz with new arrivals, Catherine smoothly introduced Emma to a cluster of important-looking guests. "Oh, that's Emma. She's an old family friend. So sweet, really." The words slid like honeyed poison through the air. Old family friend. Not fiancé. Not partner. Not future daughter-in-law. Emma caught the slight, sharp as a splinter. She smiled tightly and lifted her glass of sparkling water, pretending it was champagne, pretending it didn't hurt. A burst of laughter cracked across the room. Near the buffet table, a woman in a backless emerald gown whispered to her date, her voice carrying just enough. "Who let the librarian in?" The man chuckled into his champagne flute. "Maybe she's here to take coats." Another round of laughter followed, casual and cruel. Emma pretended to check her phone. The screen was blank. No new messages from Ryan. Just the time crawling by like a reluctant guest. At the center of the ballroom, the polished silver of cutlery and the clinking of expensive glassware built a rhythm Emma could almost dance to, if she hadn't felt so hopelessly misplaced. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and tried to blend in, knowing blending in was impossible here. Sophia Lancaster made her entrance in a halo of flashing cameras, her icy blonde curls cascading over a sparkling Givenchy gown. It was almost impressive how quickly the crowd shifted their orbits to align around her, like moths to a high-voltage light. Sophia spotted Emma almost instantly. A cruel smile curled at the corner of her mouth as she leaned in toward her gaggle of followers. "Ryan's clearly embracing philanthropy early," she said, just loud enough for Emma and several others to hear. "God bless him, taking in strays." The snickers were a knife twist. Emma pressed her palm against her hip bone, steadying herself. She would not cry. Not here. Not tonight. The waiters, impeccably dressed in starched black and white, began weaving through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Emma reached out politely to take a glass, but the server flicked his eyes over her modest dress, her simple heels, and, without breaking stride, glided past her as if she were invisible. The rejection prickled over her skin like a slap. For a brief moment, she considered slipping out the side door, disappearing into the cool New York night where no one would know her or judge her. But then she remembered Ryan. The way he looked at her like she was a rare book he never wanted to stop reading. The late nights building lesson plans together. The coffee shop proposal, not flashy, not grand, but sincere. Emma straightened her back. No, she would stand her ground. Across the room, Catherine sipped her wine and smiled serenely, watching. The lambs had come to feast, and Emma was clearly meant to be their entertainment. But what none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed, was that the evening, and their glistening little world, was about to shift forever. The laughter drifted like smoke, soft but suffocating. Emma shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her heels suddenly pinching. The room felt hotter now, or maybe that was just her skin burning under the stares and sneers she tried to pretend she didn't notice. From a few feet away, a cluster of women in glittering dresses exchanged amused glances, their whispers slicing through the air like fine glass. "She didn't even get her makeup done?" one murmured behind a manicured hand. "Maybe she's allergic to class," another added, her champagne glass tipping with a cruel smirk. Emma caught fragments of their words, each one a tiny blade nicking at the edges of her resolve. She pressed her palms together in front of her, smoothing the fabric of her dress, willing herself to stay calm, to stay steady. The violins swelled in the background, but they couldn't drown out the judgment pooling around her like cold water. Near the main table, Sophia Lancaster basked in the attention. Her laughter, bright and brittle, cracked like a whip across the room. She leaned against a billionaire's arm, her voice pitched loud enough to carry. "Honestly, when Ryan shows up, he's going to be so embarrassed." The billionaire chuckled, his Rolex glinting under the chandeliers. "Hope he brought a leash." More laughter, softer now, meaner. Emma glanced down at her plain dress, the one she had chosen because it reminded her of simplicity and grace. Felt like armor when she bought it. Tonight it felt like paper. Another waiter glided by. She didn't bother reaching out this time. Across the ballroom, Catherine raised her glass for a toast, her voice silken and sure. "To the Whitmore family," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the glittering assembly, carefully avoiding Emma. "And to a future filled with elegance, ambition, and excellence." The crowd responded with a polished clink of crystal glasses. Emma stayed silent, her fingers tightening around the slim stem of her own untouched water glass. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the photographer, a tall, thin man with an expensive-looking camera, beginning to arrange guests near the giant, flower-wrapped archway. The official engagement photos. "Only close family and honored guests, please," he called out cheerily. Emma hesitated, unsure whether to step forward or stay back. Catherine caught her hesitation and seized the moment. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly, touching Emma lightly on the arm, as if directing a wayward child. "Maybe just let the family have this one." The words stung harder than a slap. Emma forced a small nod, stepping back into the shadows as the camera flashes began to pop like tiny explosions. Sophia slid into the center of the group, her smile wide and unchallenged. For a moment, it looked like the world had rearranged itself neatly, conveniently, erasing Emma altogether. She stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible, and yet not invisible enough. From somewhere behind her, a voice drifted out. The fashion editor from a major magazine. Emma recognized the face. "She's probably just here to see how the rich live. Can't blame her." Another soft ripple of laughter. Emma closed her eyes for just a second, letting the hurt wash over her, then go. She had survived worse. When she opened them again, she saw the glass doors at the far end of the ballroom swing open. For a heartbeat, the music faltered. The crowd stilled, and Ryan Whitmore, tall, sharp-eyed, and utterly untouchable in a dark navy suit that fit him like it was born on his body, stepped into the room. He didn't glance at the crowd. He didn't acknowledge the polished senators or the glimmering actresses. His eyes, those steady, storm-gray eyes, locked instantly onto Emma, and he smiled. Not the polite, distant smile he used for board meetings or public speeches. No, the real one. The one that said, "I see you." The one that said, "Only you." Emma exhaled, a tiny, shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Around her, the crowd began to buzz again, whispers rippling like wildfire, but she barely heard it. Ryan was moving toward her, long strides cutting effortlessly across the marble floor, like a man reclaiming something precious. And as he crossed the ballroom, every calculated cruelty, every whispered insult, every ounce of humiliation began to crumble like dust behind him. The night was just beginning to shift. The ballroom held its breath as Ryan Whitmore crossed the marble floor. Every high society guest, every golden heir and silver-tongued senator, turned in perfect, stunned silence to watch him. Not toward the glittering center of the gala, not toward Sophia, who angled her body toward him instinctively, her lips already parting into a dazzling smile, but straight, unswervingly toward Emma. Emma felt the shift like a wave crashing over a silent beach. The sneers melted into confusion. The condescending smirks froze mid-smile. Ryan's shoes tapped steadily against the marble, an even, resolute rhythm in the growing hush. And then, without hesitation, without apology, he reached Emma, placed a warm hand gently on her cheek, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Tender, public, unmistakable. Emma froze, blinking up at him, startled by the quiet fierceness in his touch. For a heartbeat, everything else, the chandeliers, the gowns, the suffocating walls, faded into nothing. It was just them. Ryan leaned down slightly, his voice low but firm enough to carry through the stunned silence. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, his thumb brushing along her jawline with the lightest touch. "You're the only thing I couldn't wait to see." Gasps rippled through the room like broken glass scattered across stone. Somewhere behind them, Sophia's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in a soft, pitiful sound. The music faltered, uncertain. Catherine, standing at her table, dropped her wine glass with a sharp clatter. Her face, the careful mask of haughty elegance, cracked around the edges. Emma stared up at Ryan, her heart battering against her ribs. Was this real? Was this truly happening? Ryan turned slowly to face the room, his hand finding Emma's and holding it securely. He smiled, not the cold, camera-ready grin he wore at tech conferences, but something brighter, something sharper. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily across the stunned ballroom. "I was delayed because the Literacy Foundation, Emma, and I started just secured full funding to expand into 10 more states." He squeezed her hand, looking down at her with something close to awe. It wouldn't have happened without her. The crowd stood frozen, champagne flutes forgotten, conversations dying mid-sentence. Emma felt herself trembling slightly, not from fear now, but from something electric. Pride, relief, hope. Across the room, Sophia stood stiffly, her fists clenched at her sides, her glittering dress suddenly dull under the merciless light. Catherine clutched the back of a gold chair, her knuckles pale, her mouth pressed into a bloodless line. Ryan wasn't finished. "And while I'm at it," he said, his tone cooling to steel, "let's get something clear." He lifted their joined hands slightly, the simple engagement ring on Emma's finger catching the light like a spark. "This woman, Emma Clark, is my fiancé. She's the future of Whitmore Ventures. She's the future of everything that matters to me." The words hit the room like a hammer blow. A senator's wife coughed awkwardly into her napkin. A tech mogul shifted uncomfortably in his $6,000 suit. Even the violinists hesitated, their bows pausing mid-air. Ryan's voice dropped, slow and deliberate. "If anyone in this room has a problem with that, feel free to find the door. I won't miss you." For a beat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, slowly, a few guests shifted backward, inching toward the exits as if suddenly realizing the ground beneath them was crumbling. Emma stood frozen, her heart hammering so loudly she wondered if anyone could hear it. Ryan smiled down at her, just for her, as if she were the only person in the vast, glittering room. "You," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "are everything they wish they could be." And somehow, In the blinding glow of the chandeliers and the wreckage of shattered egos, Emma finally believed it. She wasn't just enough. She was extraordinary. For a long moment after Ryan's declaration, the ballroom remained frozen, trapped in a silent, glittering tableau of broken pride and shifting power. Emma could feel the tremor beneath the surface, like the first crack spiderwebbing through ice. Sophia Lancaster was the first to move. Her face, so carefully arranged into that practiced mask of effortless charm, buckled under the weight of humiliation. She lifted her chin, smiled too brightly, and grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing tray. She raised it high, her voice brittle but ringing. "To the happy couple," she said, her laugh too sharp, too hollow. No one joined her. The champagne in her glass trembled. The air had shifted and everyone felt it. Near the entrance, several reporters and photographers who had been snapping glamour shots of Sophia earlier now turned their cameras discreetly toward Emma and Ryan. Flashes popped, illuminating the scene like tiny lightning strikes. Emma blinked, dazzled. Ryan kept his hand steady around hers, anchoring her to the moment, to him. There was no apology in his grip, no hesitation. Only pride, only certainty. Catherine Whitmore finally broke the suffocating silence. She stepped forward, the train of her custom-made gown hissing against the marble. Her smile was still painted on, but cracks spidered through the porcelain. "Ryan, darling," she said, her voice tight, "we should have a word." Ryan didn't even glance at her. "Later," he said coolly. "If you have something to say it here, in front of everyone." Gasps rippled again through the guests. A quiet, horrified susurration. Catherine's hands clenched at her sides, the giant diamond rings on her fingers flashing like warning lights. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Catherine Whitmore had nothing to say. Ryan gave a slow, deliberate smile. It wasn't cruel, but it was merciless. "I have an announcement," he said, turning to address the entire room, his voice like a gavel striking hardwood. The remaining guests stiffened, their instincts telling them that something permanent was about to happen. Something that no whispered apology or desperate donation could undo. "Emma isn't just my fiancé," Ryan said. "Starting next quarter, she will be co-chair of Whitmore Ventures' new $400 million philanthropy division." A stunned silence fell, thicker than before. Emma's stomach flipped. She hadn't known this. He hadn't even hinted. Ryan turned back to her, his voice softening. "Because no one, and I mean no one, understands the value of investing in people better than Emma Clark." His words cracked through the walls built by pedigree and status like a wrecking ball. Across the room, faces blanched, old money matrons, tech tycoons, the social climbers who had made cruelty their currency. A senator who had laughed at Emma earlier now swallowed hard, adjusting his $3,000 tie. An heiress who had sneered at Emma's dress stared at the floor, her hands trembling around a glass. Ryan's smile widened slightly, not malicious, simply inevitable. "If your respect is based on someone's wallet, last name, or wardrobe," he said, his voice hardening, "then you're not invited to any part of my future." The line landed like a final blow. No one moved. No one dared breathe wrong. And in that shattering silence, Emma stood taller. She wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. She wasn't pretending to belong. She did belong. Not because Ryan said so, because she was enough and always had been. The first to leave were the weakest. A tech mogul, the same man who had snickered about Emma's dress earlier, muttered an excuse about an early flight and slipped toward the exit, his $8,000 shoes squeaking slightly on the marble. Two fashion editors followed, heads bent close, whispering frantically into their designer clutches. Ryan didn't stop them. He didn't even look their way. The doors closed softly behind the defectors, but the message was louder than any slam. The balance of the night had shifted. The predators were becoming prey. At the head of the ballroom, Catherine Whitmore stood like a crumbling statue, surrounded by allies who suddenly seemed a step too far away. The friends she had cultivated with charity galas and board appointments were already retreating, their smiles faltering. Sophia Lancaster lingered for a few heartbeats longer, her shoulders squared like she could still salvage something. She walked slowly, deliberately, across the marble floor toward Emma and Ryan, her heels clicking sharply in the stunned quiet. Emma braced herself. Sophia's Da Vinci gown sparkled under the chandeliers, the diamonds at her ears flashing like tiny daggers. She stopped just short of them, her mouth curving into a brittle smile. "Congratulations, Emma," she said, her voice thin and sharp. "Truly, you've exceeded everyone's expectations." The words were sugar, but the tone was arsenic. Ryan's hand tightened slightly around Emma's, steady and sure. Emma didn't flinch, didn't look down, didn't look away. Instead, she smiled. A real smile, soft but devastating. "Thank you, Sophia," she said, her voice as calm as the deep ocean. "It must be hard losing a race you didn't even know you were still running." For a flicker of a second, Sophia's mask cracked. The ballroom, already tense, seemed to exhale in collective shock. Sophia's cheeks flamed, her eyes flashing with something close to hatred. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stalked toward the exit, the crystals on her dress scattering light in frantic patterns. Emma watched her go without a shred of regret. Next to her, Ryan let out a low, almost imperceptible chuckle. "Remind me," he murmured, bending his head slightly so only she could hear, "never to get on your bad side." Emma laughed. A small, genuine sound that broke the last of the tension coiled tight in her chest. The crowd around them seemed to recalibrate. Some guests, sensing the inevitable, cautiously edged closer, offering polite nods, strained smiles. Others melted into the edges of the room, pretending intense fascination with the dessert table or the enormous ice sculpture shaped like the Whitmore family crest. Catherine finally moved. She crossed the floor with the grace of a woman who had survived countless social wars. But tonight, she looked smaller, her shoulders tight, her mouth a thin line. When she reached them, she paused, her eyes, so like Ryan's, fixed on Emma with something that might have been respect or resignation. "Emma," she said, her voice low and measured, "it seems I underestimated you." Emma said nothing. She didn't need to. Catherine turned slightly, addressing her son. "I will speak with you tomorrow." Ryan gave a small, courteous nod, a formality, nothing more. Catherine's gaze returned to Emma, lingering for a moment. Then she offered a slight, stiff nod, almost a bow, and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the marble. It was not an apology, but it was a surrender, and it was enough. Emma let out a slow breath, her entire body loosening as if a heavy, invisible weight had finally lifted from her shoulders. Ryan turned to her fully, his smile breaking open now, wide, unguarded, proud. "You," he said, voice thick with emotion, "are magnificent." Emma tilted her head, her smile playful now, easier. "Took you long enough to notice." Ryan laughed, low and warm, and pulled her gently into his arms. Across the ballroom, guests who had once scorned her now watched in something close to awe, but Emma didn't see them. She only saw Ryan, and in his eyes, she didn't have to prove a thing. She was already enough. She was already home. The ballroom, once so hostile, seemed to soften around them. It wasn't that the chandeliers dimmed or the velvet walls melted. It was something subtler, something electric. The murmurs of disdain had faded into reverent silence. The clink of champagne glasses had become tentative, almost apologetic. The guests moved slower now, their heads bowing slightly as Ryan and Emma passed. Power, Emma realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and tonight it whispered her name. Ryan laced their fingers together, giving her hand a slight tug toward the center of the room where the musicians, sensing the shift, began to play again. This time a slower, softer melody. Emma hesitated for half a second. Every instinct in her told her she didn't belong in the center of that gleaming marble floor, under that blinding spotlight. That she wasn't supposed to be the girl in the simple dress who danced in front of billionaires and senators and whispered legends. But Ryan looked at her like none of that mattered, like she belonged anywhere he stood. like she was the only thing that made sense in a world built on illusion. "Dance with me," he said simply, his voice warm against her ear, and for once, she didn't argue with herself. Emma let him lead her onto the floor. At first, the movement felt awkward. Too many eyes, too much pressure. But Ryan held her gently, guiding her in a slow, easy circle that made the room blur into meaningless color. Her dress, simple and flowing, swirled softly around her ankles. Her heart, once clenched tight with fear, opened like a flower toward the light. The guests watched, some with stiff smiles, some with genuine admiration. In a corner, a young actress Emma vaguely recognized wiped at her eyes with a napkin, blinking quickly as if surprised by her own emotion. Near the champagne tower, a venture capitalist lowered his drink and simply shook his head, murmuring to no one in particular, "She's got more grace than the lot of us combined." The music wove around them, a tapestry of sound and light and second chances. Ryan leaned his forehead lightly against Emma's, smiling. "You're not scared, are you?" he teased gently. Emma smiled back, feeling a slow, sweet confidence bloom in her chest. "Not anymore," she whispered, and she wasn't. Not of them, not of the whispers, not of being seen, because here, in Ryan's arms, in her own skin, in the center of a world that had tried to erase her, Emma Clark wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. The dance ended slowly, the music drawing down like a curtain falling after a perfect act. The room erupted into applause. Real applause. Emma blinked, startled, her hands tightening reflexively in Ryan's. "That's for you," he murmured, grinning. And maybe it was. The applause wasn't wild or desperate. It was measured, respectful. It was a concession, a recognition that something had shifted, and the old rules no longer applied. Somewhere near the back, Catherine stood rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. But even she clapped. Even she knew the tide had turned. Ryan bent down, pressing a kiss against Emma's temple. Not for the cameras, not for the guests, just for her. "I love you," he whispered. Emma closed her eyes, breathing it in like oxygen. "I love you too," she said. And for the first time that night, the world around her didn't feel like a battlefield or a test. Felt like a beginning. The music faded into a soft murmur, and the guests began to drift back into conversation, though the air was different now, less sharp, less poisonous. It was as if the night itself had exhaled, weary of holding up so many heavy masks. Emma and Ryan remained at the center of the floor, their hands still intertwined, unwilling to break the fragile, perfect moment just yet. Then, a sound split the new calm, a deliberate tap-tap-tap of a spoon against crystal. Everyone turned. It was Mr. Anderson Hayes, chairman of one of the largest media conglomerates in the country, a man who practically invented influence. He stood, holding a flute of champagne, his expression unreadable. For one heart-pounding second, Emma thought he might deliver another cut, another cruel blow to knock her back down. But instead, his gravelly voice rang out across the ballroom. "To Emma Clark," he said simply, "and to the future we were too blind to see." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Then, one by one, hesitantly at first, other glasses lifted. A senator, an Oscar-winning actress, the president of a Fortune 500 company. "To Emma," they echoed, their voices growing stronger with each toast. Catherine Whitmore remained seated, her hands clenched around the stem of her wineglass so tightly it might have shattered if she dared move. Her face was a careful blank, but the storm behind her eyes was impossible to miss. Emma caught her gaze just for a moment. There was no gloating in her look, no triumph, only calm, only truth, and perhaps that, more than anything, was what broke Catherine. Across the ballroom, some of the socialites who had once sneered now approached cautiously, tentative smiles on their faces, hoping to align themselves with the new center of gravity. It was almost laughable, how quickly loyalty shifted when the winds changed. Ryan fielded the first few handshakes with cool politeness, but he made it clear with every gesture that Emma was the star tonight, not him. An assistant from one of the top philanthropic organizations in the country leaned in, starry-eyed. "Miss Clark, would you be willing to speak at our summit next month? We need voices like yours." Emma blinked, caught off guard. I'll think about it," she stammered, still struggling to adjust to the tidal wave of sudden acceptance. Ryan chuckled quietly beside her, squeezing her hand once before letting it go. Not in abandonment, but in quiet trust. This was her moment. He had opened the door, but she had stepped through it on her own. Sophia Lancaster had long since disappeared, slipping out of the ballroom with a bitter look over her shoulder, her glittering dress catching on the edges of other people's chairs as if the room itself no longer wanted her. Catherine, however, remained, rooted, frozen, until finally, she rose. The room fell silent again, the sudden hush electric. Catherine crossed the marble floor with slow, measured steps, every inch the queen she had spent her life training to be. But there was a crack in her armor now, one that even the finest tailoring couldn't hide. She stopped in front of Emma. For a long, breathless moment, they simply looked at each other. Two women from different worlds, standing on a bridge neither had wanted to build. And then Catherine spoke. "I was wrong." Just 3 words, but they dropped like stones into the silence, sending shockwaves through the watching crowd. Emma said nothing. She didn't need to. Catherine hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face, before she added, "Welcome to the family." It wasn't warm, it wasn't loving, but it was something. And in this world, it was everything. Emma inclined her head in a small, graceful nod. "Thank you," she said simply, not for the acceptance, not for the apology, but for the acknowledgement, long overdue and hard-won. Catherine stepped back, folding herself into the shadows of the ballroom's edge. The room seemed to breathe again, looser, freer, lighter. Ryan returned to Emma's side, slipping his arm around her waist as the applause swelled once more. This time genuine, this time earned. "Are you ready?" he whispered against her temple. Emma smiled, a real, wide, radiant smile that felt too big to fit inside her chest. "For everything," she whispered back, and she meant it, because tonight she hadn't just survived. She had claimed her place, not through wealth, not through pedigree, not through anyone's permission, but through the one thing none of them could take away, her own unwavering, unstoppable truth. The ballroom lights dimmed gently as the evening wore on, the golden haze softening into something warmer, more intimate. It wasn't the chandeliers or the velvet that made it feel different. It was the people, the same walls, the same glittering crystal, but now the room pulsed with a quieter kind of respect. Not fear, not obligation, something almost resembling admiration. Emma stood near the terrace doors now, the cool night air slipping around her shoulders like a whispered promise. The city glittered beyond the glass, endless, alive, waiting. Ryan joined her there, his jacket draped casually over one arm, his tie loosened, his gray eyes soft with something that melted every last shard of doubt inside her. For a while, they just stood there in the hush between one life ending and another beginning. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "You know you don't have to stay tied to any of this," he said, nodding toward the remnants of the ballroom. "Not the money, not the legacy, not even me, if you ever decide." Emma cut him off by slipping her fingers into his. "Ryan," she said, her voice steady, "I didn't fight tonight to belong to a name, or a company, or a legacy." She turned to face him fully, her dress brushing softly against the marble, her hair stirring in the breeze. "I fought because I know exactly who I am," she continued, "and because I finally realized I'm allowed to choose who stands beside me." Ryan's throat bobbed with the force of holding something back. Words, tears, maybe both. Emma smiled. A smile not polished for cameras, not strained by expectations. Just her, real and sure and blinding in its simplicity. "And I choose you," she finished softly. For a moment, Ryan could only stare at her like she was something he had prayed for and never quite believed he could deserve. Then, without a word, He slipped a velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, a simple gold band gleamed, understated, timeless. "No grand stages," Ryan said. "No chandeliers, no cameras, just you and me." Emma laughed, a low, beautiful sound that felt like it wrapped around the night itself. "Yes," she whispered. Yes to him. Yes to herself. Yes to everything she had fought to claim. Ryan slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. Not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of it all, the beautiful, terrifying rightness of it. A new song drifted from the musicians inside. Not loud, not grand. A soft, old love song that few people remembered anymore. Ryan held out his hand again. "One more dance?" he asked, tilting his head with that boyish grin that had once undone her in a dingy Vermont coffee shop. Emma slipped her hand into his without hesitation. Always. They danced there, just the two of them, in the golden spill of light from the ballroom, with the city humming like a heartbeat beyond the glass. No one else mattered. Not the gowns. Not the sneers. Not the names whispered in marble halls. Only the simple woman and the man who had always seen her. Only the life they were about to build together, not on a foundation of wealth or legacy, but on the only thing that ever truly lasted. Love, honor, choice. And when they finally pulled away from each other, breathless and grinning like fools, Emma knew the world hadn't handed her a place tonight. She had taken it, and she had chosen it for herself. 6 months later, the world barely remembered the gala where everything had shifted. News cycles moved on, flashing across screens with newer scandals, newer faces, newer distractions. Names that once commanded rooms. Catherine Whitmore, Sophia Lancaster, the laughing senators and moguls. Dimmed like dying stars, their influence fading into yesterday's luxury dust. But some changes didn't need headlines to be real. Whitmore Ventures announced its historic $400 million philanthropy division, focused on education, community rebuilding, and programs that lifted forgotten voices. And at every press conference, at every signing ceremony, standing quietly but unmistakably at the heart of it all, was Emma Clark. Not in designer armor, not in borrowed sparkle, in simple dresses, with the same low chignon, with the same clear hazel eyes that had once been underestimated by a ballroom full of kings and queens. The city began to whisper a new kind of story now. Not about the girl who didn't belong, but about the woman who changed the room just by standing in it. Ryan and Emma married in a small ceremony overlooking the Hudson River. No media, no designer exclusives, no palace of glass and marble. Just family. Real family. Chosen family. When Emma slipped the gold band onto Ryan's finger, there were no chandeliers to catch the light, just the sun setting behind them, wrapping the world in warm gold. And when she spoke her vows, she didn't promise perfection or performance. She promised truth. She promised growth. She promised the kind of love that was built, not bought. They moved into a modest brownstone on a quiet street lined with cherry trees, far from the glossy towers of the elite. Ryan still built companies. Emma still built dreams. But now they built them together on foundations no gala could shake. And sometimes, when the city hummed around them and the nights were soft with promise, Emma would pause in the doorway of their home, barefoot and smiling, and remember the night she stood alone against a room full of wolves. Not because she needed to hold on to the pain, but because it reminded her the world could underestimate you, mock you, try to erase you, but they could never define you. Only you could do that. And Emma Clark had quietly, fiercely, forever